There are moments in life when nothing outwardly changes, yet something important quietly shifts inside. No applause follows it. No one else notices. It is not dramatic, and it does not announce itself. It arrives gently, almost unnoticed, like the decision to sit still when the world expects movement. This is where a different kind of strength begins. Many people believe power must be visible. They believe it must speak loudly, defend itself quickly, prove itself without delay. But there is another form of power, one that grows in stillness. It begins the moment you realize that not every silence is empty and not every response is required. Sometimes the most meaningful choice you make is the one no one sees. There is a quiet dignity in choosing simplicity, not the kind that withdraws from life, but the kind that refuses to be pulled into every noise. It is the understanding that energy is precious and attention even more so. When you begin to value them, you naturally become more selective about where they go. This is not avoidance. It is discernment. They may never notice the moment you stop explaining yourself. They may not recognize when you decide to listen instead of react. To them, it looks like nothing happened. But inside, a boundary has been drawn, a gentle one, a calm one, and it changes everything. At first, this choice can feel uncomfortable. Silence often does. It removes the familiar tools of defense and justification. It leaves you alone with your thoughts, your emotions, your breath. In that space, there is no one to impress and nothing to prove. Only the truth of how you feel and the quiet question of how you wish to live. This is where many people turn back. Not because silence is wrong, but because it asks for honesty. It asks you to see your impulses clearly, to notice how quickly the mind wants to respond, correct, explain, or protect. And then, gently, to choose otherwise. There is a strange freedom in realizing that you do not owe the world a reaction, that your worth does not rise or fall with every misunderstanding, that you can let moments pass without chasing them, without wrestling them into meaning. This realization does not make life smaller. It makes it lighter. They may continue speaking. They may continue assuming. The world does not slow down just because you do, but something inside you does. And in that slowing, clarity begins to form. You start to hear your own thoughts again, separate from the noise. You begin to feel the difference between what matters and what merely demands attention. This is not the silence of retreat. It is the silence of self-respect. It is the quiet confidence of someone who knows their direction well enough not to argue about it. Someone who understands that not every path needs an explanation, and not every journey needs witnesses. Over time, this choice becomes less deliberate and more natural. You stop reaching for words out of habit. You stop filling spaces just to ease discomfort. You allow pauses to exist. You allow others to sit with their own thoughts just as you sit with yours. And in doing so, you discover that calm is not something you chase. It is something you allow. The quiet choice is not about becoming invisible. It is about becoming centered. It is about knowing where you stand, even when no one else is looking. And from that place, life begins to feel simpler, steadier, and more deeply your own. Silence does not always feel peaceful at first. Often it feels like pressure, like standing still while everything around you moves too quickly. The world has a way of filling every gap with sound, opinions, expectations, and when you choose not to join in, the quiet can feel heavy. It settles in the chest, in the breath, in the small moments where you wonder if staying silent is costing you something. There is a discomfort that comes from not reacting. The mind reaches outward, searching for release, for words that could smooth things over or push something away. Emotions rise, not because something terrible is happening, but because they are no longer being distracted. In silence, they are finally seen. This is why it can feel so uneasy. Silence removes the noise that once softened. the edges of feeling. They continue speaking, moving, responding as if urgency is the only language that matters. Around you, reactions happen quickly, almost automatically. You begin to notice how rare it is for someone to pause, how unfamiliar it feels to let a moment breathe. And in that contrast, your own stillness can start to feel exposed. There may be moments when you question yourself, when you wonder if quiet means agreement or if restraint is being mistaken for absence. The discomfort deepens when you realize that silence does not protect you from being interpreted. It simply removes your ability to shape the interpretation. This can feel risky, like stepping into open water without knowing how deep it goes. Inside, a subtle tension builds. Thoughts repeat themselves. Old habits of explanation whisper that a response would be easier, that words could settle the feeling faster. But the calm you are learning to sit with is not immediate. It asks you to stay present with the unease instead of escaping it. This is where emotional discipline quietly begins, not as control, but as awareness. You start to notice the exact moment when emotion turns into impulse. The space between feeling something and acting on it becomes visible. At first, that space feels uncomfortable, even unnatural, but it is real. And it is powerful. They may not notice this inner struggle. From the outside, nothing appears to be happening. But inside, you are learning to remain steady while the urge to react passes through you. You are learning that emotions, when not fed by immediate response, often soften on their own. They change shape. They lose urgency. Silence asks you to trust this process, to trust that you do not need to rush toward resolution. That clarity does not arrive faster when chased. Sometimes it arrives only when the mind stops pushing. This can feel counterintuitive in a world that values speed and certainty, but inner calm follows different rules. As you sit with the discomfort, something subtle shifts. The pressure does not disappear, but it becomes more familiar, less threatening. You begin to recognize that the feeling you once tried to escape is not an enemy. It is simply a signal, asking for attention rather than reaction. In this space, you start to see how often noise is used as protection, how constant expression can hide uncertainty, how reaction can be a way of avoiding stillness. And you begin to understand that choosing silence is not about suppressing emotion, but about allowing it to move without being turned into conflict. The discomfort of silence is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something deeper is being touched. It is the moment when old patterns loosen their grip and something quieter begins to take their place. If you stay with it gently without judgment, you may find that what once felt heavy begins to feel grounding, and the silence that pressed against you slowly becomes a place you can stand. There is a particular kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being misunderstood. It appears quietly, often after you have chosen restraint instead of reaction, calm instead of defense. You notice it in the subtle shift of how they look at you, in the assumptions that form when your silence is filled with their own conclusions. They may think you do not care, or that you have nothing to say. Some may believe you have withdrawn, or that you are unsure of yourself. Silence leaves room for interpretation, and interpretation is rarely gentle. When you do not offer explanations, others supply their own, shaped by their fears, expectations, or habits. This can sting, even when you know the truth inside. There are moments when the urge to clarify becomes strong, not to argue, but to be seen accurately, to be known as you are, rather than as they imagine you to be. This desire is deeply human. It is painful to feel reduced to a misunderstanding, especially when you know how much care lives beneath your quiet. The world often equates presence with expression. To be loud is to be involved. To respond quickly is to be engaged. When you step outside this pattern, you risk being overlooked or misjudged. They may move on without waiting for your voice, assuming that silence means consent or indifference. And in those moments, the quiet path can feel costly. Inside, a question begins to form. Is it worth it to remain silent when it leads to being misunderstood? Why? Would it be easier to explain yourself, to correct the narrative before it hardens? These questions do not have easy answers. They require you to weigh external clarity against internal peace. What makes this phase difficult is that misunderstanding touches something tender. It can awaken old fears of not being valued, not being heard, not being enough. Silence, which once felt grounding, may suddenly feel like exposure. You become aware of how much courage it takes to let others see only what they choose to see. They continue living within their assumptions, often unaware of the story they have written about you. And you begin to realize that not all misunderstandings are meant to be resolved. Some exist simply because perspectives differ. Some remain because the effort to correct them would cost more than the misunderstanding itself. This realization can be unsettling. It asks you to loosen your grip on how you are perceived, to accept that your inner truth does not always translate outward, that being understood by everyone is neither possible nor necessary. This is a quiet but profound shift. As time passes, you start to notice something else. The people who truly listen do not require constant explanation. They sense your presence without demanding performance. They are not confused by your calm, and their understanding, when it comes, feels natural rather than forced. For those who misunderstand you, silence becomes a mirror. It reflects their own assumptions back to you. Oh, them! You are no longer carrying the weight of correcting every misinterpretation. You begin to see that their view of you says more about them than it does about your worth or intention. This does not mean the discomfort disappears completely. There are still moments when being unseen hurts, but those moments no longer define you. You learn to let them pass, much like emotions, without turning them into action. You learn that self-respect sometimes means allowing others to be wrong. In this space, something steadier forms. You stop measuring your value by how accurately others perceive you. You begin to trust your inner alignment more than external approval, and slowly the need to be understood by everyone softens into a quiet confidence. Being misunderstood is not a failure of communication. Sometimes it is the natural result of choosing depth over noise, and as you continue forward, you carry with you the understanding that clarity within is more enduring than clarity without. After a time, something begins to change, not outside, but within. The quiet you once endured starts to feel less like an absence and more like a presence. In the spaces where you once searched for words, you begin to listen, not to the noise around you, but to the subtle movements beneath it. This is where understanding deepens. Listening beneath the surface is not about waiting for the right moment to speak. It is about allowing your inner world to reveal itself without interruption. Though, TS rise more slowly now. Emotions appear with clearer outlines. You notice how certain feelings arrive quickly, while others take time to form. And in this noticing, you gain a kind of intimacy with yourself that constant reaction never allowed. At first, this listening feels unfamiliar. You may realize how rarely you gave yourself full attention before, how often your focus was turned outward, shaped by expectations and responses. Silence removes these distractions. It creates a space where your inner voice is no longer competing to be heard. They continue with their assumptions and their pace, but something in you has shifted. You are no longer leaning toward the world for validation or direction. Instead, you are learning to recognize what resonates within, what feels aligned, what feels unsettled. This awareness does not demand immediate action. It simply asks to be acknowledged. As you listen more closely, patterns begin to emerge. You start to see which emotions repeat themselves and which fade quickly when left alone. You notice how certain situations trigger familiar responses and how those responses lose their grip when observed rather than obeyed. This understanding is quiet, but it is deeply stabilizing. There is a moment when you realize that clarity does not come from thinking harder. It comes from listening more patiently. The mind, when given space, organizes itself naturally. Answers appear without being forced. Decisions feel less urgent, less dramatic. They arise from a place of steadiness rather than pressure. This inward listening also changes how you relate to discomfort. Instead of resisting it, you begin to ask what it is revealing, not in words, but in feeling. You learn to sit with uncertainty without rushing to resolve it, and in doing so, you discover that many of your fears soften when they are met with attention instead of avoidance. They may not notice this shift. From the outside, your life may look much the same, but internally, a foundation is forming. You are learning to trust your own perceptions, to rely less on immediate feedback, to recognize that your inner state is a valuable source of guidance. Listening beneath the surface also brings humility. You see your own contradictions more clearly. You recognize where you have acted out of habit rather than intention. This awareness is not harsh. It is gentle. It allows you to meet yourself honestly without judgment or urgency to change. As this practice deepens, silence becomes less about withholding and more about understanding. You are no longer silent because you are unsure what to say. You are silent because you are listening, and that listening feels complete. Words, when they come, are fewer and more considered. There is a quiet confidence that grows from this place, not the confidence of certainty, but of familiarity with your inner landscape. You know where your emotions tend to gather. You know which thoughts deserve attention and which can SS without engagement. This knowledge does not make you rigid. It makes you flexible. In listening beneath the surface, you discover that inner realization is not a single moment, but an ongoing relationship, a steady conversation with yourself that unfolds over time. And in that relationship, you find a sense of grounding that does not depend on noise, reaction, or explanation. There comes a moment when you realize that silence is no longer something you endure, but something you choose. It is subtle and unannounced, like recognizing a familiar path without needing to look down. You notice that the impulse to respond still arises, but it no longer feels urgent. It waits, and often it fades. Not answering does not mean disengaging from life. It means understanding that not every sound requires an echo. Some moments pass more cleanly when left untouched. You begin to see how often words are used to manage discomfort rather than to express truth. And in choosing not to answer, you give yourself permission to remain steady. They may expect a reaction. They may leave space deliberately, assuming you will fill it. When you do not, the silence can feel heavier for them than it does for you. You sense the shift, the pause, the unspoken question, and yet you remain where you are, grounded in the awareness that nothing essential is being lost. This choice carries a quiet kind of courage. It asks you to trust that your silence will not diminish you, that your presence does not depend on constant expression. In moments like these, self-respect reveals itself not through assertion but through restraint. You begin to understand that many exchanges are driven by momentum rather than meaning. One response leads to another, building speed without direction. When you step out of that motion, you interrupt a pattern, not to control it, but to free yourself from it. At first, not answering can feel like withholding something, as though you are denying the moment its expected conclusion. But over time, you realize that what you are actually protecting is clarity. By not reacting immediately, you allow emotions to settle. You give perspective time to arrive. They may interpret your silence as distance or disinterest, but what you feel inside is different. There is an increasing sense of alignment. You are no longer pulled into conversations that leave you unsettled. You are no longer spending energy explaining what you already understand. This does not mean you never speak. When words come from this place of stillness, they carry more weight. They are simpler, calmer, and less defensive. You notice that you speak less, but you mean more, and that feels honest. Choosing silence over reaction also teaches you patience. You learn that time reveals what urgency conceals, that many situations resolve themselves when not fueled by immediate response. This realization changes how you experience conflict, misunderstanding, and pressure. There is a quiet dignity in letting things unfold without interference. You begin to trust the natural rhythm of events, to accept that not everything needs to be shaped by your hand. This trust is not passive. It is attentive, grounded, and deeply respectful of your own boundaries. As you practice this restraint, your inner life becomes less crowded. Thoughts move through you without lingering unnecessarily. Emotions rise and fall without leaving behind residue. You feel less reactive, not because you suppress feeling, but because you understand it. They may continue to operate as they always have, reacting quickly, speaking often, filling silence without noticing it, and you may find that you no longer feel the need to join them there. Your quiet becomes a place of refuge rather than isolation. In choosing not to answer, you reclaim something essential: the space to observe, the space to feel, the space to decide. And in that space, you discover that your strength does not depend on being heard in every moment, but on knowing when your voice truly matters. As time passes, the quiet choices you make begin to shape you in ways that are not immediately visible. There is no single moment when you feel transformed. Instead, strength gathers slowly, like a steady current beneath the surface. It does not demand recognition. It simply carries you. This strength is different from the kind that announces itself. It does not rush forward or seek to dominate. It grows in the background, in moments when you choose patience over impulse, restraint over reaction. Each time you pause, something within you settles into place. They may never notice this change. From the outside, you may appear unchanged, perhaps even less expressive than before, but inside there is a growing sense of stability. You are less easily moved by provocation, less dependent on outcomes you cannot control. This steadiness becomes familiar, almost comforting. You begin to realize that true strength often looks like softness, not because it lacks firmness, but because it is no longer defensive. You no longer brace yourself against every perceived challenge. You meet situations as they are, without the need to harden or withdraw. Restraint teaches you to distinguish between what deserves your energy and what does not. This discernment is quiet but precise. You feel it as a subtle inner signal, a sense of whether engagement will deepen your understanding or simply drain it. Over time, you learn to trust this signal. There is also a humility that comes with this kind of growth. You recognize how often you once reacted from habit rather than intention, how much energy was spent maintaining appearances or protecting a fragile sense of control. This recognition is not heavy with regret. It is light with clarity. As your inner strength deepens, you become more comfortable with uncertainty. You do not rush to fill gaps with conclusions. You allow questions to remain unanswered. This patience changes how you experience waiting, disappointment, and ambiguity. What once felt like tension now feels like space. They may still speak loudly. They may still move quickly, driven by urgency or expectation, and you may notice that their pace no longer sets yours. You are less affected by their reactions, less tempted to mirror them. This is not detachment, it is balance. There is a quiet confidence in knowing that you can remain composed even when emotions arise, not because you suppress them, but because you trust your ability to hold them without being overtaken. This trust is earned slowly through experience rather than effort. Restraint also sharpens your awareness of others. You listen more carefully. You notice tone, pauses, and what remains unsaid. Without the pressure to respond immediately, you become more present. And this presence, though understated, is felt. You may find that people respond differently to you now. Some may feel unsettled by your calm, others may feel drawn to it, but your sense of self no longer depends on these reactions. You are rooted in something quieter and more enduring. This strength does not isolate you. It connects you more honestly to yourself and to others. It allows you to engage without being consumed, to care without losing balance. It is flexible, responsive, and grounded. Over time, you stop thinking of restraint as something you practice. It becomes part of who you are, a natural way of moving through the world. And in that naturalness, you discover that the strongest presence is often the one that does not need to announce itself at all. As time passes, the quiet choices you make begin to shape you in ways that are not immediately visible. There is no single moment when you feel transformed. Instead, strength gathers slowly, like a steady current beneath the surface. It does not demand recognition, it simply carries you. This strength is different from the kind that announces itself. It does not rush forward or seek to dominate. It grows in the background, in moments when you choose patience over impulse, restraint over reaction. Each time you pause, something within you settles into place. They may never notice this change. From the outside, you may appear unchanged, perhaps even less expressive than before, but inside, there is a growing sense of stability. You are less easily moved by provocation, less dependent on outcomes you cannot control. This steadiness becomes familiar, almost comforting. You begin to realize that true strength often looks like softness, not because it lacks firmness, but because it is no longer defensive. You no longer brace yourself against every perceived challenge. You meet situations as they are, without the need to harden or withdraw. Restraint teaches you to distinguish between what deserves your energy and what does not. This discernment is quiet but precise. You feel it as a subtle inner signal, a sense of whether engagement will deepen your understanding or simply doctor it. Over time, you learn to trust this signal. There is also a humility that comes with this kind of growth. You recognize how often you once reacted from habit rather than intention, how much energy was spent maintaining appearances or protecting a fragile sense of control. This recognition is not heavy with regret, it is light with clarity. As your inner strength deepens, you become more comfortable with uncertainty. You do not rush to fill gaps with conclusions. You allow questions to remain unanswered. This patience changes how you experience waiting, disappointment, and ambiguity. What once felt like tension now feels like space. They may still speak loudly. They may still move quickly, driven by urgency or expectation, and you may notice that their pace no longer sets yours. You are less affected by their reactions, less tempted to mirror them. This is not detachment, it is balance. There is a quiet confidence in knowing that you can remain composed even when emotions arise, not because you suppress them, but because you trust your ability to hold them without being overtaken. This trust is earned slowly, through experience rather than effort. Restraint also sharpens your awareness of others. You listen more carefully. You notice tone, pauses, and what remains unsaid. Without the pressure to respond immediately, you become more present. And this presence, though understated, is felt. You may find that people respond differently to you now. Some may feel unset, led by your calm. Others may feel drawn to it, but your sense of self no longer depends on these reactions. You are rooted in something quieter and more enduring. This strength does not isolate you. It connects you more honestly to yourself and to others. It allows you to engage without being consumed, to care without losing balance. It is flexible, responsive, and grounded. Over time, you stop thinking of restraint as something you practice. It becomes part of who you are, a natural way of moving through the world. And in that naturalness, you discover that the strongest presence is often the one that does not need to announce itself at all. As your relationship with silence deepens, you begin to notice what it quietly preserves, not in dramatic ways, but in subtle ones that reveal themselves over time. Silence becomes a kind of shelter, not from the world, but within it. It creates a space where your inner life remains intact, even as everything around you continues to move. What silence protects first is your sense of proportion. You stop giving equal weight to every moment, every opinion, every disturbance. Some things no longer feel as urgent as they once did. You recognize which experiences deserve reflection, and which can pass without leaving a mark. This discernment is gentle, but it changes how you move through your days. They may still bring their expectations, their assumptions, their emotional weather, but you no longer absorb it all. Silence acts as a bounder. That does not need explanation. You are present, but not porous. You listen, but you do not carry what does not belong to you. In this protected space, clarity grows. Without constant reaction, your thoughts settle into a more natural order. You see situations more fully without the distortion of immediate emotion. Decisions become less reactive and more considered. You begin to trust your ability to respond when the time is right, rather than when pressure demands it. Silence also protects your emotional energy. You notice how many conversations once left you feeling unsettled, drained, or restless. Now, with fewer words exchanged, there is more room to recover, more room to return to yourself. This is not withdrawal, it is care. There is a quiet respect that grows from this. Respect for your own limits, respect for your attention. You begin to understand that attention is one of the most valuable things you offer, and silence allows you to offer it with intention rather than obligation. They may mistake this shift for distance, but what you experience is closeness of a different kind, a closeness to your own values, your own rhythms. You feel less fragmented, less pulled in multiple directions. There is a coherence to your inner world that was harder to maintain when everything demanded a response. Silence also guards your reactions. By slowing the space between feeling and action, it prevents small moments from becoming lasting regrets. You are less likely to speak from frustration, less likely to act from fear. When you do respond, it comes from a steadier place. Over time, you realize that peace is not something added to your life. It is something revealed when unnecessary noise falls away. Silence does not create peace, it uncovers it. And this peace is not fragile. It is resilient because it is grounded in self-awareness rather than circumstance. They may continue to move quickly, to fill space with words, to react as a way of coping. And you may feel a quiet compassion for that. Not superiority, but understanding. You recognize the restlessness you once shared, and you recognize the relief that comes from stepping out of it. In protecting your inner space, silence also deepens your capacity to be present. When you do speak, your words are more attentive. When you listen, it is without the urge to interrupt or prepare a reply. This presence is felt, even if it is not named. There is a growing sense of ease that accompanies this way of being. You are less tense, less guarded. You trust yourself to handle what arises without constant preparation. This trust allows you to meet life with openness rather than resistance. Silence does not remove challenges. It changes how you carry them. It protects your inner life from being overwhelmed, allowing you to move through the world with steadiness and care. And in that protection, you find not isolation, but a quiet, enduring sense of peace. In time, you may notice that life begins to feel lighter. Not because it has become easier, but because you are no longer carrying what was never yours to hold. The urgency to react has softened. The need to be seen a certain way has loosened its grip. What remains is a quiet steadiness that moves with you rather than ahead of you. Your days are not empty of sound or interaction, but they are less crowded inside. There is space between moments now, space to breathe, to observe, to let things arrive and leave without clinging. You move through conversations without tension, through silence without discomfort. This ease does not come from detachment, but from familiarity with yourself. They may still misunderstand you. They may still project, assume, or rush past your quiet. But these moments no longer disturb you in the same way. You recognize them as passing weather rather than defining conditions. Your inner ground remains firm, even when the surface shifts. There is a simplicity to this way of living that feels honest. You no longer complicate moments with unnecessary explanations or rehearsed responses. You trust that what matters will make itself clear in time, and what does not you allow to fade without resistance. You begin to appreciate how little is actually required for a life to feel whole, a calm mind, a steady rhythm, the ability to listen without urgency and speak without regret. These are not dramatic achievements. They are quiet alignments, felt more than announced. Silence becomes woven into your lie. Faye, not as an absence, but as a companion. It walks beside you in ordinary moments, in pauses between words, in decisions made without haste. It reminds you that you are not late, not behind, not lacking. You are simply present. There is strength here, but it is inward-facing. It does not seek validation or recognition. It does not compare itself to others. It rests in the knowledge that you can meet life as it is without needing to reshape it to feel secure. They may continue chasing clarity through noise, reassurance through reaction, and you may feel no need to follow, not because you are above it, but because you have found another way, a way that feels sustainable, respectful, and deeply your own. As this settles, you find that peace is no longer something you wait for. It is something you return to again and again, in breath, in stillness, in the quiet understanding that you do not need to prove your place in the world. Your life may look ordinary from the outside, but inside there is a richness that comes from alignment, from knowing when to speak and when to remain still, from choosing restraint not as denial but as care. Nothing about this path is loud. It does not promise transformation overnight. It offers something quieter and more enduring, a sense of inner stability that does not depend on circumstances, a respect for your own emotional landscape. And so you continue, not hurried, not withdrawn, simply attentive, carrying less, listening more, allowing life to unfold without forcing it into shape. In this gentle steadiness, you find that simplicity is not a lack of depth, but its truest expression. This is not an ending, but a settling, a quiet strength that remains long after the noise has passed.